Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the summer season reboot of Vintage Books Live. Tonight we have T.H. Lennon here to visit with us about his middle grade fantasy novel, which I think is just over his shoulder there, back there.
Yeah, yep. I may have
It,
staged my setup a little bit.
it's called Fog and Fireflies. It's actually, do you mind holding up the cover a little bit closer so we can see it? Because it is a
Sure.
great cover. It's very spooky.
Yes, it
That's
definitely is.
awesome. Remind me to ask you later in the interview about the cover because
Yeah, I
it is a
worked with a
great cover.
wonderful artist, so I have a lot to say. So,
Um, so I'm just going to start off the way I usually do. Just talk to us a little bit about the book. What I usually tell people is tell us a little bit, like share what essentially is the flap copy. So enough to get people interested, but don't give anything good away.
sure. Yeah, Fog and Fireflies is sort of, I would say, upper middle grade to YA, kind of a blend at that transition point for folks. It's about a girl named Agma, who's about 14 years old, who lives in a world that hundreds of years ago was destroyed in this magical cataclysm, and it left behind this malevolent, malignant fog that blankets the landscape and constantly moves things from place to place. So the towns and villages are carried from place to place like ships adrift at sea. They can only find each other, trade with each other if they happen to drift past each other in the fog. And this has changed the culture of the communities. They have festivals if they happen to find another town, all of these sorts of things. And this fog can also create phantoms, like you see on the cover, which can change shapes, mimic voices, and can be deadly to adults, but never to children, which is why children have become the guardians and protectors of their communities. They live along the walls of their villages, sort of communally raising each other while protecting their home as the adults live in the center of these towns. So yeah, it's about Ogma and her friends trying to protect their home from the fog. It's about some of the fantastical people they meet who come out of the fog. And it's a little bit about, I would say a big theme actually is sort of the difference between growing older and growing up. Um, so yeah, that's Fog and Fireflies.
That's an interesting concept. Can you expand on that a little bit? I love that.
Sure.
Because of
Yeah,
course
so
my first reaction is, some kind of snarky comment about never wanting to grow up, but I'm curious
no, it's quite the opposite actually.
how
So
that works in the book, which I guess is not the same as what I'm thinking.
no, it's actually kind of the opposite of the sort of Neverland phenomenon, which is you know how sometimes you set out to write something and you don't realize what it was about till you get to the end. This is sort of what happened to me with this book. So I did know that I wanted to write a story about kids taking care of each other, about kids who had to be responsible for themselves and who maybe even had to be responsible for some of the adults in their life. And um, by the time I finished the book, and frankly, by the time I started talking to my therapist about what it was like writing the book and when I finished this book, I
Yeah.
realized that it was that a major theme was this concept called parentification, which is this thing that happens. It's very common in the foster care system or with children who have parents who are injured or disabled or things like that, where the kids will become like parental figures to their siblings or to the adults around them. And it could also happen when, folks' parents are getting divorced and things, the children feel like maybe they don't have that attention or that ability to be kids quite in the same way for whatever reason, not always through anyone's fault. And so I realized the story was kind of about that. It sounds a little bit
Yeah. Yeah.
highfalutin and a little bit pretentious, but there are multiple characters we follow, the main character, several others, and I won't spoil all these things, who have a different reaction and grow up in different ways when they're put under that kind of pressure. Um, and so some who handle it well, some who don't handle it so well.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I mean is that it is possible to grow older without growing up,
Yeah.
not in the positive Neverlandy way, but
Yeah. Yeah.
in a little bit of a almost a kind of traumatic lost childhood sort of way.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I'm
anyway,
not so sure that the whole Neverland thing is really a very good idea either.
no, doesn't
A
seem
lot
like
of
it, right?
a lot of people have done some really interesting, kind of horrible things with that whole
But
idea.
exactly, like,
So,
where did the pirates come from? Is that what
yeah,
happened to the
exactly,
Lost Boys when
exactly.
they?
Yeah, when they
Yeah.
grow up.
Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
so
it's just I do think it's interesting the idea of writing as catharsis.
yeah,
Like even when you are writing a story that you didn't intend to have be cathartic, it can be. So I
yeah,
think that's just interesting how that.
yeah. It's
Did
it's
you
just really interesting, and I think, I am someone like a lot of authors, I think, and a lot of readers who feels to a certain degree like there are kinds of books and even specific books that sort of saved them during hard parts of
Yeah,
their childhood,
yeah,
right? And that are still meaningful to them as adults, regardless of what age they were written for.
yeah,
And that, I did have this inkling that I wanted to write that sort of book, a book that hopefully a child in that kind of circumstance would take to heart and
yeah,
like understand and feel seen. So
yeah. What precipitated you sitting down and writing a book? A
just at
book in
all,
general, a
yeah.
middle grade fantasy, I always am curious. I know kind of what my genre journey was, and I'm always curious what other people's are, how do they end up
Yeah.
writing specific genres and
To be honest, it goes back a little bit to what I was just saying. It's a large part of what I read myself and what felt really impactful to me growing up. And it was primarily in that middle grade young adult genre that I found some things, things like Susan Cooper's Dark is Rising,
yeah, yeah,
Diana Wynne Jones, just all the Howl's Moving Castle and everything. A lot of um, even like Diane Duane or Terry Pratchett or all these other kinds of things. And not all of his stuff is specifically young adult targeted, but still. And one of the things that I felt was, and I didn't know how to articulate this at first, but to me it felt like, let's call that broad category, sort of children's lit, right? Has this like opportunity to be a little bit more authentic or a little bit more honest with the way it talks about to its audience and the way it talks about emotions and the emotional journey and like kind of the power of things. And there is something about adult fiction, especially non-genre adult fiction,
yeah,
that is often a little bit cynical. And I knew that's not what I wanted to write.
yeah,
Now I'm
yeah,
super interested in writing, fantasy for adults and science fiction and some of those things too, because I love all of that as well. But I felt like I wanted to start in a place that gave me my own kind of love of reading and things like that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'd
yeah.
have always wanted to be writing and always wanted to do these things. Um, I did English lit and philosophy in school, all this kind of stuff, some creative writing.
Yay!
Yeah, over at Reed, which is how I wound up here in
Yes, yes.
um, 20 years ago now. But
Yeah,
yeah. So
yes.
anyway, yeah, no, I think that's kind of the basic journey is it's just I felt like you can not in a paternalistic way, but in just kind of an open way, you can put a certain kind of honesty into books for younger readers. And
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah. Um, where did so what I find interesting about what you did with the book is that the fog is almost a character.
Yeah, very much.
And I'm really curious where the idea for the fog was that kind
Yeah,
of present at the beginning when you were figuring out what you were what the story was gonna be, or did that come later?
it was actually on one of the first concepts in this was thinking about because the conceit of almost any children's book has to be why is it that the kids have these agency? Where are the adults?
Yes.
Like,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
why isn't someone coming in and putting their foot down and doing something
Yeah.
about this, right?
Yeah.
And like, I'm not a big fan of the Disney style, we're going to fridge the mother or kill off Mufasa 20 minutes in. And like,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
I don't really particularly like that method of doing things. And so I was partly thinking about that, but I also had this like very strong aesthetic memory. So, um, I've lived in a few different places before I came to Portland, but I spent most of my childhood in California, on the Bay Area, on the peninsula, near the
Yeah.
coastal area, and near, if you're in that area, near Edgewood or Filoli, where you have the mountains by Highway 92, you get this marine layer effect when you're driving on the
Mhm.
highway, where you get these enormous rolling banks of fog at certain times of year that just crest like a wave over the hills and fill
Oh,
up that little
yeah.
valley. And
Yeah.
I just remember that from growing up, seeing it just, if not every day, at least every week, pretty much. And it was just a very strong kind of magical feeling image.
Yeah.
And part of the way that I write and write concepts and even for other manuscripts and things that I'm working on is I actually start by collecting images. And
Yeah.
I grab anything that speaks to me, memes on the internet, photographs, all sorts of stuff that all just have just vibes, more or less.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I
Yeah.
start taking those and sort of stacking up them on top of each other if they meet a mood. So I had these images of the fog, video clips, some photos that I had taken from going back, things I found online. And then also I had, right, the amazing Howl's Moving Castle Studio Ghibli film and the way that
Mhm.
the fog imagery works in that film and other things. And that kind of condensed. And I took that stack of images and said, what is this? How does
Yeah.
this fit
Yeah.
in the world? And
Yeah.
that's what kind of generated the fog as a character. And then
Yeah.
adding the kind of magical aspects to it, it leaving a changed landscape behind, it creating these phantoms, is just the evolution from there. So
Yeah. Yeah. I do find it interesting that you had put some thought into like why are these kids getting to run off on this adventure? Because I think not every book does that. Some kind of just the
yeah.
kids go off on the adventure and you think, what the heck?
Is there a family somewhere freaking out,
Yeah.
putting up posters around
Yeah.
town, kind of thing?
Now, I don't know that kids really worry too much about that when they read middle grade books, but I know as an
Yeah.
adult, I kind of think, well, this is a great book, but also,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
Yeah. No, I think it's kind of a big deal because it's I don't know. I reflecting on it, I think, like I said, I didn't want to just have the kids are orphans kind of
Yeah,
thing. I
yeah,
think that's a little too trite and a little bit, again, like I don't want to be sort of cynical about it. And I feel like it is actually kind of important for the nature of this particular story that adults are present. They just
yeah,
can't solve everything for these
right,
children. So,
right.
yeah.
Well, and I think that that rings true to the emotional experience that you were talking about too, though. I mean, because that is the real world, right? Adults can't solve everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes things are not great because they can't. And
Yeah.
so I like that. I like that use of it. Um, I'm just looking down here because I wrote all my questions out.
Sure, for sure.
Another thing that I'm really curious about is, so you said you have an English lit major, and I did see that on your bio and went to read, but you're in tech, right?
Yes, the day job is in tech. Yep.
Okay. And I'm very curious how those two things play against each other because
Yeah, to be honest, so slight background and shout out to my friends in the open source community who might see this stuff, because I'm in specifically the Drupal open source community in my day job, and and I work for a nonprofit foundation that promotes open source software that can be used by anyone around the world. So it's used from everything from like mom and pop shops to like the United Nations website and things like that. It's all these sorts of things.
awesome.
And it's a great community to work in with a lot of passionate people all over the world. And I've gotten to travel a lot as a result, which is really great. So the sort of positive interaction is I get to meet a certain class of people, which feels rare in tech, especially in tech news, who are also sort of bleeding hearts for their particular cause. In this case,
Yeah.
freedoms and privacy
Yeah.
and not ceding control of everything we do and everything we own to for social media corporations and all those things. This idea
Yeah.
of owning your own words is actually a phrase that we use a lot. And you can kind of see where that would have some appeal
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
writerly side. The practical reality is when I was doing a double in English lit and philosophy, none of those were going to pay the bills. And so I was doing tech stuff to help pay down my tuition.
Ah, I don't know
Yeah,
anything about that.
exactly. Pay student loans, all of
Yeah.
those things. And it was just the natural, especially because I graduated during the 2008 recession. It was kind of the natural thing to transition into to pay the bills, pay the
Yeah.
mortgage,
Yeah.
um, and all of that kind of stuff. And there's not a huge direct connection to the writing in that they fulfill very different things. And I've felt personally much more emotionally fulfilled since being able to really put the writing out there. And I didn't realize how much of a dramatic difference it would make going from manuscript to it actually being read by a significant number of people and hearing from people of different ages, especially those who are young people, that's kind of target audience, that it's kind of had an impact on them. And that's been kind of amazing and a little bit of an antidote to
Yeah.
what the day job feels like sometimes when it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
all these things.
I think that they play off of each other very nicely in some ways, though, too. I think
Yeah.
because they use different parts of your brain, and
Yeah,
so you might
one of the
kind of
things, one of the
do something really hardcore, and then you can go do
yeah,
something else really hardcore, and
one of the fortunate things is they don't use up the same parts of my
yeah,
like emotional reserves, right?
yeah,
So in some
yeah,
ways I can feel recharged by doing something like this,
yeah,
and talking about writing and talking about all of these things, and that fills the batteries. Whereas, it's a different set of batteries doing the day job stuff, even if I'm also doing podcasts and also doing
yes,
all those
yeah,
things.
exactly. Yeah, I love that. I think it's fun to hear too how people end up in different places, especially those of us with English degrees who have to go, okay, and now what am I gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. It's so tough. And it's an increasingly there's a lot of folks who say, oh, it's harder than ever to publish, but and then there's the argument that it's easier than ever if you can self-publish and all these things. But then, right, is Amazon owning the market or the big five publishers now owning every? I'm suspicious of people who say any one time in history is better or worse for some
Yeah,
creative thing than any other time. But there are some scary things
yeah,
going on. The AI stuff,
oh
the amount
yeah,
of spam from that, all those things.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's
What
interesting.
can you talk about your experience self-publishing? Like what has been easier or harder than you expected it to be, you
Yeah.
know, and then just thoughts on the process, that things that you've learned that might be helpful to people coming up behind and
Yeah, no, I'd love to share all sorts of things. So one of the things is that there is, especially self-publishing, there's a sort of sliding scale of how much you can choose to invest up front and how much you
yeah,
want to sort of trickle out over time as you can kind of afford to do it. But there's a few essentials, which is you absolutely have to hire a solid professional editor, who you're going to seriously work with, and that might be one of your biggest investments. I think it was
yeah,
hugely valuable to hire, actually, in the case of this book, multiple artists for the cover art and interior illustrations. And that made a huge difference. And if you're a certain kind of person who likes to procrastinate from your writing by doing this, you can do the formatting yourself using a tool like Vellum or something like that. If you're not that kind of person, or you know that you're the kind of person who's going to use that as a procrastination tool, you might want to hire someone to do the right?
no,
And like that,
we would never.
I know, right? So, right, you've got to really have that draft. Actually, my number one advice, that was surprising, or no, maybe it's not really surprising, but it was just it caught me off guard, was that the most valuable revision process that I ever did was, because we're working on an audiobook, and I started playing around with this before the book was actually published.
Yeah,
And recording myself reading the whole thing through, I found so many things that because I was too close to it, my eyes skip over whole paragraphs, right?
Yeah,
So I'm not going to catch all
exactly.
that stuff.
Yeah.
But reading it out loud, not only do you catch things because it forces you to slow down to every word, you also understand kind of the music of the language a little bit
Mhm.
better, the phrasing choices, the word choices, and how these things lead into each other. And I would say that, if people say you've got to write three drafts after the first draft before you're done, you can save a lot of time. You can eliminate two of those by doing one of them
Yeah.
this way, like reading
Yeah.
the whole thing through. So, and that's all just to get you the manuscript. So you asked a really big question. So
Yeah. No,
then
I
you got
know.
that manuscript, right? And you've got to do printing. And I did about 6 months of work just researching what makes it possible for retail stores to be willing to stock print
Yeah.
versions. How do you retain rights at various electronic distribution points and all of these things? And one of the truths is there's another, people who are into self-publishing and writing probably do know this, but for a lot of general readership, they probably don't know that in the print world, especially for self-published printing, there is pretty much a monopoly on who you can go with if you want retail distribution, which is to say, Ingram Spark kind of owns the relationships, or Ingram in general, Ingram Content Group, in that physical publishing world.
Yeah.
So yes, technically there are other options, but if you want that retail distribution, you're doing a print set and running a Kickstarter and then trying to go around with that is not going to be easy because the
Yeah.
returnability, the wholesale margins, the fact that people can already order it in their system because they use it to order their other books
Yeah.
made such a difference. And that goes to what was surprisingly easier. Getting into retail was way easier than the internet had led me to believe.
Yeah.
Um, so many people who say it's just impossible. Don't even bother. Just do Kindle Unlimited. Give
Yeah.
give away all your rights to the Bezos Corporation, and
Yeah.
that's how you'll make the majority of your money anyway. Whatever, whatever. And it turned out that if we had by checking off the boxes of professional editing, cover design, layout, finding the retail distribution that makes it as easy as possible for independent bookstores or corporate chains and all those things.
Yeah.
What we were doing was eliminating steps in the chain where someone could say no.
Yeah.
And then by going in person and like this is the thing, getting off the computer, getting off the forums that tell you what is and is not possible, and bringing advanced reader copies to bookstores and just saying, hey, would you give this a look and let us know if you're willing to stock some copies?
Yeah.
Here's the ISBNs. Yes, we're on Ingram Spark. Yes, it's returnable. Yes, it's the maximum discount. All those things
Yeah.
makes it possible for someone to take a chance on your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of the biggest thing.
And I think that it's interesting from the bookstore end of things because I see a lot of self-published people talking a lot about, oh, bookstores are terrible and they'll never carry your book
Yeah.
and I think yes, but a lot of us have gotten burned too many
Yeah.
times
I'm sure. Well, this is
by
the thing.
people who don't do their homework and don't
Yeah.
want to. I think a lot of people come to self-publishing because they want to do their own thing.
Yeah.
And
And
it's like, well,
sometimes,
that's okay. But if you're gonna sell the book, there are
yeah.
still certain things you have to do.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of books come in that I'm like,
I mean, you've
yeah,
got to be
you
willing to understand that you
didn't
need to
do
play.
any of your own research and stuff.
Yeah, you have to be willing to play
Yeah.
ball with the retail model that will make, independent bookstores your
Yeah.
partner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the do your own thing is with the content of what you're writing. That's why
Yeah.
you're the author,
Yeah.
not with,
Yeah.
don't suddenly start strange new formatting habits or printing in
Yeah.
Comic Sans. Like that's not
Yeah.
important to the
Yeah.
content of your art.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
distribution.
and that's what I tell people when they come in. It's like you have to understand as soon as you're on the shelf, you're competing with
Yeah. Yeah, you're competing with things
James
that have,
Patterson and
yeah, that have
Sarah J.
HarperCollins or
Moss
whoever
and
behind
all
them.
these
And
other people. And so
yep.
you got
No,
to be able to
it is funny
up to the
whenever
game.
most recently. So that was the other thing is like it was, I say surprisingly easy not because it was easy. It was still
Yeah,
hard
yeah,
because
yeah.
again,
It's a
you
lot of
all in
hoops.
retail space get inundated with things, and your initial
Right.
reactions, I don't mean you specifically, but of
Yes.
all the
Yeah, for
bookstores we've
sure.
been to, the initial reaction is always skepticism. And like I said, that's why you have to have like it's open, but there's like that's why you have to be able to say, hey, here's none of these red flags
Yeah,
that are going
exactly.
to prevent
Exactly.
you from even being able to say, okay, well, I'll give it a read or I'll take a look.
Yeah.
And being able to cross, if you can cross those minimum hurdles, that's one of those things. People are like, um, 95% of books will never get published, and the ones that are published will never sell more than 100 copies or whatever. There's these like increasingly
Yeah.
small sliced pies. And to me, it feels like if you've gotten past all those first check boxes, most of
Yes.
that
Yeah.
95% is already behind you. You're kind of
Exactly.
already ahead of them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
No, and I think
oh,
it's interesting to me that to have this conversation because you came in with the book and it's like, okay, I'm immediate, and we can talk, maybe you can share a little bit about your cover artist now if you
yeah,
want, because that was definitely something that was like, oh, hey, this is striking.
this is a level of
And
quality. Yeah.
you flip through the pages, it's obviously been somebody who knew what they were doing, designed the interior design. And so, as a bookseller, I'm immediately going, okay, this person clearly took the time to figure out how to do this. And
Yeah.
that tells me that I'm probably gonna, because the other thing is I can't read every story that comes in,
No, yeah.
obviously, all the way through, but I usually read a couple chapters
The only
and I
person
flip
who has a
through
to
different
be read
chapters,
pile bigger than
you
like modern TikTokers is bookstore
yeah.
owners. The whole store.
Yeah, well, we have people come in, so if they talk to you as if you've read every book in the store, and it's like, I don't know, I haven't read that one, and they're always shocked. And it's
It's like, have
like,
you done the math, folks?
the
That would be like
only book here.
10 lifetimes back to back. No,
But
but
you can read the first chapter and look at the layout and everything and know immediately whether it's something that
yeah.
someone has taken time on.
Yeah, and
Um,
again, that's the thing. I think that also, right, that demonstrates um again, not to sound corporate, but that demonstrates a level of professionalism that
yes,
also
yeah,
tells the bookstore, oh, this person is probably not going to be weird to deal with. They're probably not going to argue if I have to return copies or all these
yeah,
other strange
yeah,
things that
exactly.
like again are a psychological barrier to someone saying, yeah, no, I'll give you
Yeah.
I'll take a
Yeah,
chance on you
exactly.
and take a chance on your book. So I know, I mean, I think that's a big thing. Before turning to the cover art, because I would love to talk more about that. The last thing that I think was huge is advanced reader copies and advanced reviews was a really big deal. And so, you don't. There's so many scams for paid reviews and all these kind of things out there that you do have to be really, really careful of. But NetGalley and Edelweiss,
Yeah.
as far as I can tell, are the two industry standard place for booksellers, libraries, publishers, whoever else to look at new release information, download advanced copies, and make NetGalley more so than Edelweiss make available to even sort of social media
Yeah.
influencers
Yeah.
advanced copies of things.
Yeah. Edelweiss tends to be mostly booksellers, but yeah.
Right, exactly. So getting in both, it seems to me, seems valuable. And so that's what I did. And again, that's another thing that I think a lot of people who are contemplating this, they probably haven't heard of either of those yet. Maybe they have.
Yeah.
I would just
Yeah.
say, along with the professional editing, that whole checklist, the last one would be yes, it's invest in those. You'll get a lot of eyes that you won't otherwise, and you'll get a lot of reviews, right? That's the
Yeah.
only reason that
And
I
reviews
have
are the
like
thing.
yeah, because you want on launch day, you want to be able to say, I've got 100 or 200 reviews on Goodreads and a good average already and all these
Yeah.
things so that again, you're trying to take away all the excuses for someone to say,
Yeah.
I'm not sure about
Exactly.
taking a
Or
chance
put the
on
book
them.
back or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. So who did the beautiful cover design?
Yeah. So this stunning cover art, first of all, I'll show it off a little bit. So
Yeah, it's
obviously we have the
gorgeous.
figure of the Phantom, and then this is an image of Ogma this is kind of from a flashback scene. So she's younger than she is in the book, but sort of facing down this Phantom as a young girl. Um, there's an interior image of one of the caravanners who lives out in the fog. The character's name is Melial, and one of another one of the caravanners whose name is Nod, with his kind of owl-faced
Yeah.
appearance and things like this. And so this color artwork in the book was done by an artist named Dominic Ferrari, who lives in the UK. And he's done combinations of concept art and posters and music festival stuff, all sorts of things. I don't know that he's done a huge amount of cover work. I think he had done some. We saw a little bit in
Yeah.
the portfolio.
Yeah.
But truthfully, we first found him. What we did was we sort of auditioned a bunch of folks on like Fiverr or DeviantArt or these other kinds of
Yeah.
things who
Yeah.
had a portfolio that looked good. And we said, okay, we're willing to put down some money for like a single figure commission to see how close it is to the brief we give, right? Because when
Yeah.
someone does original work, if you don't know what it was supposed to look like, you can't quite tell how accurate
Yeah.
they're going to
Yeah.
be, right? Um, and so Nick did unbelievable work. He's a very fast too, an amazing sort of digital painter. And certainly want to keep working with him on additional art. And I'm sure he's open to commissions to other writers out there who might be
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there is some truth to cover art and like poster kind of art being having some similarities. Like
yeah.
you're trying, it's your cover art is, the whole don't judge a book by its cover is complete balderdash. I
Yes,
judge every book
absolutely.
by its cover.
Yeah, no, that's actually the very first thing you do is you'll judge the
Yeah.
book by
Oh,
its
for
cover.
sure.
And
Like,
again, if it
oh, and I
passes a
can't
certain
read.
threshold, you'll keep going.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, if someone says, "Oh, I really like this book, you should read it," I might still consider it if the cover
Yeah.
is so-so. But when we are going through Edelweiss, which, as Tim mentioned, is kind of where all the publishers upload their catalogs to. So when we are choosing books for the store, we'll open a catalog and we'll go through, 900 titles at one time. The cover is huge
Yeah.
because
How else
I'm
are you going to
scrolling and
triage?
scrolling and scrolling, and if an image catches my eye,
Yeah.
that's the first thing that's going to make me stop and go, oh, that looks cool.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's totally worth it. And I will shout out the font on the cover was a different artist who did that as well. Abid Mohammed did a custom font for the spine and the cover
How
and things like
fun.
that.
Yeah.
So
That's very
um
neat.
yeah, it
You
has
get your
among
own
other things,
font. Oh my gosh.
it has a windmill integrated into the O in Fog, because there's a windmill town and
Yeah.
all these kinds of things. Like
That's
little
super cool.
details that
Yeah.
what I love is so here's where I might have been a difficult client. I think it was okay because it seems like it seems like Nick still gets along with me pretty well. But is we sent him me and my publishing partner sent him like a 30-page brief of like all the excerpts from the book that were relevant to the scene. I mentioned earlier how I build things out of like mood board images, right?
Yeah.
So that all of those pictures and all of these things, and then a description and my terrible napkin sketching of kind of the proportion and layout of things. Um, and partly because I remember, cover art is a lot better now than it used to be in the
For
genre
sure.
fiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and I just remember as a kid reading all these fantasy books that had bodice ripper style covers where the color of the hair of the main character is wrong and like all these things that in the first 3 pages you're like, nope, did they even read anything before they
Yeah.
did this
Yeah.
cover?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And it feels so good to have something that feels like it's ripped straight out of my brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's really
so,
fun. So I will follow up by, well, first of all, two closing questions.
sure.
First of all, it sounds like from the end of the book there is more to come.
Yes.
And I'm curious, are you at a point where you can talk about that yet? Because sometimes people aren't, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'd be happy to talk about that a little bit. So it is probably still about 18 months away. This book we didn't quite say, but it came out just in April was the original
Yeah.
release.
Yeah.
And so and as I said, we're actually producing the audiobook now, and it's a full musical composition, sound effects, the whole thing. I'm
Oh,
narrating.
fun. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun, but that's the main project. And
Yeah.
between that and still doing the day job thing,
Yeah.
um,
Details,
yeah,
details.
the other manuscript still has more work to go. But there is another story coming with these characters in this world, and I think I have a third in mind as well that are coalescing around certain main characters. So Agma will definitely still be present. She may not be quite the central focus of the next book in the same way.
Oh, fun.
But yeah,
That's
there's
awesome. That's
definitely more
well,
story.
and honestly, 18 months is that's not two
Well,
years
we'll
between series is not that terrible. So
yeah, we'll see. So yeah.
I think we've been conditioned badly to like, okay, where's the next one? And it's like, are you
Yeah,
kidding?
it's
You gotta
funny.
write it
We
first.
simultaneously have that, and then we have the like, the Robert Jordan or George R. R. Martin kind of things where we're like, please, the next one. Um,
Yeah, we
so
should probably not get going on
want to
that.
fall somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a little bit more to the less
Yeah, yes, definitely. I'd like to not have too much more gray going on by the time we get to that.
time. And then I'm just always curious, when you think about the book and you think about particularly kids reading it,
Yeah.
is there something that you hope they take away from it?
Um, yeah, that's a really good question. And a little bit of an emotional one, like I said, given kind of the nature of what this is about and that parentification stuff and some of it coming from my own experience. So I guess like um I kind of want it to be I want it to be sort of for those kids who, and I think every kid sees themselves in this place in some form or at some time in their life, who's finding themselves caring caring for themselves or responsible for something maybe before they feel totally ready. And I just want them to feel seen and feel like there's
Yeah,
some heroism to that. And there's something to be sort of proud of, but also there is still a childhood for them, right? They haven't given it up in the course of
yeah,
doing that. So,
yeah,
and that's hard as kind of a complex thing. I don't know if you necessarily ask them straight off that that's what they would see or say, but I just kind of want that seed planted.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, we'll see. And I've gotten some very sweet feedback from some folks and some and some sweet feedback from some adults. One of my early readers sent me this wonderful email where she said, "This was amazing, and I'm going to be talking to my therapist for months." And I was like, "I'm not quite sure that's a compliment, but
Well,
thanks."
that's no, actually, I think it probably is in a weird
Yeah,
sort of
no, no.
way.
Um,
Yeah, no, and I think honestly, I mean, I've had this conversation with other middle grade and well, authors at all levels and all different genres, but particularly middle grade and YA is there's a certain power to it that
yeah,
even as
it's
an
being read at
adult
a formative
reader,
time for people. Yeah,
yeah, and I sometimes I think even especially as an adult reader,
yeah,
because you're seeing the kid that you were in the book
yeah,
and you have some distance from that. And
yeah,
sometimes that's even more powerful than if you had read it when you were
yeah.
that
And I
age.
like that. And
So,
I appreciate it when stories operate on that level, where there's a level
yeah,
where you're kind
yeah,
of in the moment of the adventure and the storyline and all those sorts of things. And that's probably what the younger readers are sort of picking up on first. And then there's that level where you're reading this and thinking, realizing what that means for those
yeah,
kids. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was really fun.
Thank
I'm
you. I
very
really enjoyed
excited
it.
that you're gonna keep going with the story.
Yeah.
And just so for everybody who's watching this either tonight or as the replay, we have Fog and Fireflies in the store. So stop by and pick one up. If you're not in the area, we are happy to sorry, total blank there, but we are happy to mail it. We do ship. But Tim also has a list of retailers on his webpage too. If you have a favorite local store, especially if you're in the Portland metro area, but you're not near Vintage Books, there are a lot of other local places that are carrying it. So
Yeah.
be sure to check that out. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.